Today, we're diving into the world of Mencius. He was an ancient Chinese philosopher with this incredibly optimistic take on human nature, an idea that honestly became one of the most influential in all of history. And his arguments, which he came up with during a time of total chaos, they still challenge us today.
So, let's just start with the big one. A question that people have been wrestling with for, well, forever. Are we born good or are we born evil? I mean, it's a huge debate, and it affects everything from how we raise our kids to how we run our countries.
But you gotta understand, for Mencius, this was not some abstract thought experiment. His answer was a direct response to the absolute brutality of his time. This was an era where that question had life and death stakes.
To really get Mencius, you have to picture the world he lived in. It's called the Warring States period, and it was pure turmoil. We're talking about princes locked in these constant bloody wars. You had ambitious politicians just hopping from court to court, stirring up trouble for their own benefit. It was a world that seemed to be screaming proof every single day that people were anything but good.
And then, right into the middle of all this chaos, walks Mencius. And instead of just getting cynical and throwing in the towel, he did the opposite. He came up with this radical idea that the fix for all this violence wasn't more control or tougher laws. Nope. He believed the answer was to nurture the goodness that's already inside every single one of us. He was a true, unshakable optimist.
You know, there's this fantastic legend about his childhood that just perfectly sums up his whole philosophy. The story goes that his mom moved their house not once, not twice, but 3 times to find the perfect environment for him. First, they were near a cemetery, and little Mencius started imitating the mourners, so she moves. Then they're near a market, and he starts imitating the loud, haggling merchants, so she moves again. Finally, she settles them next to a school, and he starts imitating the polite and learned scholars, and she thinks, okay, perfect. Now, the key takeaway here isn't that our environment makes us who we are, but that the right environment is absolutely crucial for nurturing the goodness that's already there.
Okay, so that raises a pretty obvious question, right? If we're all born with these little seeds of virtue, why is the world so often such a mess? Why is there so much cruelty and greed? Well, this is where Mencius's argument gets really smart. He uses this incredible metaphor to explain everything.
He asked us to just picture a place, a specific mountain, called New Mountain. He says it used to be just gorgeous, covered in lush, beautiful trees, but because it was right next to a big city, people kept coming with axes and chopping everything down. They just stripped it totally bare.
And this is where it all clicks. Our original human nature, he says, is just like that forest. But all the bad stuff, a terrible environment, corrupt leaders, even our own selfish desires, those are the axes chopping down the trees. They're the cattle that come and eat up any new little sprouts that try to grow. So when we look at a person who's been damaged like this, we might think, wow, they were never good to begin with, just like someone looking at that barren mountain. But Mencius says that's a huge mistake. The mountain's deep down nature is to grow trees, and our deep down nature is to be good. That potential, he argues, is never, ever truly gone.
Mencius gives this super sharp, real-world example of this. He says, look, even a person who's starving to death would refuse food if it was, thrown at them with total contempt. Our innate sense of dignity is just that strong. And yet, he points out, that same person might completely forget that sense of righteousness when they're offered a huge salary or a beautiful house. For those luxuries, we compromise our principles. Mencius saw this as the great tragedy of what he called losing our original mind. We trade our inner worth for outer stuff.
Now, you have to remember, Mencius wasn't just thinking these thoughts in a vacuum. The intellectual world back then was a total battlefield of ideas. You had all these different philosophies, each with its own diagnosis for what was wrong with society. And you can just see how wildly different these views were. On one end of the spectrum, you had a guy named Yang Chu, a total individualist. He believed we're all just self-interested, and his whole philosophy was basically every man for himself. On the other end, you had the utilitarian, me, you, who argued that something called universal love was the cure for everything. And then right there in the middle, you have Mencius, arguing no, we're born good, and the real key is having a government that helps us cultivate that goodness.
Okay, so this idea from Mihei, universal love? I mean, on the surface, it sounds amazing, right? He basically said that if everyone just loved other people's families and countries as much as their own, all our problems would just vanish. But Mencius saw a really big problem with this. He argued that it's completely natural and actually it's right to have a special, deeper love for your own parents. He thought any philosophy that ignores that fundamental human bond was just, well, it was unnatural and it was never going to work in the real world.
So here's the crazy part. Despite all these fierce debates, and the fact that not a single ruler in his own lifetime actually put his ideas into practice, Mencius's philosophy didn't just fade away. In fact, it did the opposite. It ended up becoming the philosophical bedrock of Chinese civilization for more than 2,000 years.
And his legacy, it's just profound. He's the one who really cemented the idea that human nature is fundamentally good into Confucianism. And that changed everything. It meant that a government's job wasn't just to control people. Its main job was to create a world where their natural goodness could actually grow and flourish. That put this huge moral responsibility on rulers. And this part is truly radical. It gave the people a philosophical reason, a justification, to get rid of a ruler who failed to do that.
This quote, this is the absolute heart of his political thought. It's his take on the mandate of heaven. And what he's saying is that the will of heaven, the will of the gods, isn't some secret message from on high. It's simply a reflection of what the people want and need. If the people are suffering under a bad ruler, then that ruler has lost heaven's approval, period. I mean, this was a revolutionary idea that said the ultimate moral authority doesn't belong to the king, it belongs to the people he's supposed to be serving.
So we end up right back where we started, with that powerful metaphor from Mencius. When you look out at the world today, at all the problems in society and in people, what do you see? Do you see proof that we were just born broken, a mountain that never had any trees to begin with? Or do you see the damage that's been done, the scars left by the axes and the neglect, and recognize a forest that, against all odds, is always trying to grow back? That's the question Mencius leaves us with.